Today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player reviews, taking a look at Anthony Cirelli's season. Is he ready for a bigger role in this Lightning team? Is he ready for some hardware? All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On this episode, we're continuing our player reviews. We're talking about Anthony Cirelli. We're talking about his season, where he fits into the Lightning in the future, as well as possibly in the running next season for some hardware, the Selke Trophy, namely. We talk about all of that on today's episode. But first, I just want to tell you, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Drop a comment below. How did you feel about Cirelli's season and where his career is going at the moment? So this past season, I think we could all agree, was most definitely a step up from last year for Anthony Cirelli. Obviously, the big thing that has kind of been plaguing him a little bit throughout his career, for the most part. I mean, here and there, every season is a different story with Tony C, but really it's been his health. And I think this year you saw the healthiest version of Anthony Cirelli, and not only the healthiest version of Anthony Cirelli, but also the best version of Anthony Cirelli. Played 79 games, scored 20 goals, had 45 points. His face-off percentage was a shade under 50. You would like to see that a little higher, but overall, a very good season for Anthony Cirelli. I think the thing that really stuck out to me was just how he got his goals this year. 3 power play goals, 2 shorthanded, and 3 game winners of the 20 that he put up this year. And that just shows you just what he's doing, his ability to really just score at any moment in any situation. And that's the kind of thing that the Lightning needed this year, really, given, the times in which they just went flat. And I mean, their offense. And with Anthony Cirelli, I think that really the thing that goes under the radar with him, with at least some not Lightning fans, but fans outside of the Lightning fan base, is probably just his versatility. Some games you're going to need him to be the tough guy. You're going to need him to really just go out there and lay big hits. Other games you're going to need him to be more of a finesse guy, or other games a facilitator. Most times it's all 3 of those things. But I think this year, we've been talking about for a couple of seasons now here on Locked On Lightning. Really, we're waiting for him to be the next big thing at the center position. And we'll talk more about this in the second segment, really, how high is his potential. But I really think we've really hit it. I think we're at the point now that, he still does have to develop somewhat, but I think that given his experience, given how he played this year, given Cooper's willingness to kind of move him up and down here and there throughout the course of the season, I think we're at the point now where we have gone from the up-and-coming grizzle young guy who, has the potential and has the skill to be a top 6 guy And now we're at the point where we could confidently say that he is a guy that could probably play on the first line of almost every team in the league. And I think we'll see in the future, especially next season, probably more time on the first line, especially given, maybe some of the things that may or may not happen this summer for the Tampa Bay Lightning in terms of signings and possible trades and all that stuff. But I think regardless if a Duclair comes back or if a Stamkos comes back, even if Stamkos comes back, I still think he should be at least on the second line. But I think Cirelli is at the point to where you could play him at that first line center position, throw Point out on the wing, allow him to kind of just have a lot more space to do things, even though, yes, we have seen Point be very successful, obviously, from that high slot position. But I think Cirelli, he's ready for that big responsibility to play on that line, that first line position with Cooch and, with Point. And he's ready for everything that you would need out of a guy who is really just going to spearhead your center position. I would like to see him possibly get some power play time this year. That was the thing that I feel like, even though, yes, he had a couple of power play goals next year, I want to see him have more time. Really, the Lightning finished the season with Hagel, Point, Cooch, Stamkos, and Hedman on that first. The second was Cirelli, Esamont, Paul, and Sergachev and Duclair. I would like to see Cirelli on that first line as to where he might fit. It's kind of just, I think it's just kind of more so of what Cooper feels comfortable doing. You could definitely, I think, especially if Stamkos comes back and he doesn't play up to where you feel like he should be playing, you could move Point out to one of those spots, or Cooch, whoever you would like. But I think that Cirelli, you could definitely throw him on that first power play unit. Having him on that second power play unit, I feel like kind of is a redundant thing, him playing alongside Paul, both guys who play very well down the middle, along with Esamont and Sergey and whoever might be that fifth guy out there. It could very well be, I don't know, maybe Janot. I don't know, because like I said, there's a lot of moves that are going to need to be made this offseason. But I think that really, we saw him take just a ginormous step this season in his development. And I think that, yes, there are a lot of things that you have to kind of be worried about with this Lightning team going into next season. But I think that when you look at Cirelli and where he's at in his career, I think for the most part, you could be comfortable with not worrying where he should be and where he needs to be. We'll talk more about it in a second, because I just want to leave that part of it. But just to kind of preface it, I think that he's now ready to be a star, not in Tampa, but on the national, like on the league level. We'll talk more about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel. Now, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, subscribe to our channel there. If you want to follow us on our social media pages, go ahead. We're at LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter at DenkyDank, DenkyDank. You can also find my other work at boltsbythebay.com. So I think this is something that we've been having like a slow buildup towards ever since the 1920 season. It's been talked about in excess, whether it be by Brian Ingblom and Dave Randorf, or by the pregame, postgame guys for Bally Sports, or by Dave Mishkin, or by me or other Lightning outlets. It's been talked about quite a bit with Anthony when you talk about Anthony Cirelli, that he is developing or is going to be a Selke Trophy guy candidate on a yearly basis. And I firmly believe, I still believe that that's going to be the case. I think some of it has to do with where he is in the lineup. Maybe for the most part, if you look at the Selke Trophy guys, the finalists this year, those guys, I would imagine, maybe not Stahl, but those other two guys obviously play on the first lines of their respective teams. Austin Matthews is an interesting one. I am curious. I don't look at Austin Matthews as a spectacularly defensive centerman. I don't even view him as a center. Or I don't know. I feel like I say center because most times when you're talking about the Selke Trophy, obviously it's awarded to the forward who plays well defensively, and most times that is a center. And I don't know. I look at Austin Matthews mainly as a winger. I don't know why. Maybe it's just as he scores a ton of goals and that's why. But I think that in the next couple of years, if we continue to see the trajectory of development and play from Anthony Cirelli, I think that we're definitely going to see him in that category, at least in the finalist discussion for the next couple of years. And it's not something that's way too out of the realm of possibility, given if you look at his track record. I mean, he's finished in the top 5 twice in his career. And I thought in those seasons, those were good seasons, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I didn't think that he was there quite yet. I think that if you look at his all-around game this past season, I think this was the best year by far he has ever had. The only thing that I kind of have to nitpick from his game was really just his face-off. I would rather him be on the side of 50. But you know what? Being off by 0.8% is not that big of a nitpick. I mean, I'll live with 49.2% on his face-off percentage, especially when the guy's playing 79 games a year. I can't really fault him on that. And the fact that he finished 4th back in the day with only 68 games played back in 1920, I can't really nitpick that. But I think that, it's now that Patrice Bergeron is gone from the league, I feel like this is going to be an award. This isn't going to be an award that's going to be just won consistently every single year by the same person. I don't think you could really say that for the most part with any award in the NHL, given just how good the league is now. And I'm saying that because it helps Cirelli enough. We're not going to have people get in their mind that one person owns an award. And I think that helps his case. I feel like oftentimes, you get a player winning the same award every single year. You just kind of assume that player is good for it the next year, and then other players get often overlooked. And, one can make the case in the years, even though Bergeron was a great player, that maybe other guys may have deserved it. The Selke I'm talking about. Same goes with the Vezina. When we talk about Hellebuck, who's a great goaltender, maybe there was a year or two there. It could have gone to Vasilevsky, even though he already has one. But when I look at Anthony Cirelli and where I look at him going into next year as well as the other years after that, I view him as a potential top 5 centerman in the entire league. And I think that, he could put up the numbers, and we all know this. He's going to put up the numbers. He's going to do Anthony Cirelli things, as we often like to phrase it here on Locked On Lightning. I still think that, a large part of it, that recognition is going to be on the rest of the league to kind of fall in line, something that a lot of hockey fans prefer not to do when it comes to Tampa Bay Lightning players for whatever reason. I've been doing this podcast since 2020, and I still don't understand the amount of hate. Even if this team has won back-to-back Stanley Cups and gone to 3 straight finals, I don't understand why you hate on success the way people do, especially when it's a team like Tampa Bay. But with Anthony Cirelli, I think that he's there. I think that, or more so expect, as we'll talk in the third segment, expectations for next season. I expect him to be in that conversation. I expect him to hit 50 points next year. I expect him to play on the first line. I really expect his face-off percentage to be over 50 next year. This past season has been the year where really it just gives you a ton of confidence and could really set you up for the rest of your career. I forgot to do it in the first segment of this podcast, but I'm going to really just say that I'm going to give him an A, just because, you always want guys to be better, and regardless of who it is. But, given just how putrid this team looked at times and, just the amount of obstacles that this team faces here and there with, just things in their roster, we're going to talk about all the faults as we're doing these player reviews. I think we could all agree that Anthony Cirelli, along with obviously Nikita Kucherov and a few other players on this team, were really the consistent shining moments or highlights of this Tampa Bay Lightning team throughout the course of the season. I think I can't sit here and really properly predict how many Selke trophies he's going to win in his career, but I think at least he's going to get one. And I think that's a good enough thing to be proud of, considering just how many good centers there are in the league. Every team for the most part has at least one guy who is an elite caliber center. And it's just one of those things where, and you even, I heard it, I think it was earlier this year or at some point this year, it might have been a little later. I think it was actually the April game against Pittsburgh. I happened to catch the game on the Pittsburgh feed at the time, and they were just talking about Sidney Crosby. And I don't think they were just pandering to the story of the game, but I firmly believe this. They were actually talking to Sidney Crosby, as we all know, one of the greatest players of all time, center. They asked him, who is your least favorite player to play against? And he said Anthony Cirelli. And I've actually heard him say that before in other conversations as well. And the fact that one of the greatest players of all time, one of the greatest players of his generation, is coming out and telling the world that you are the least favorite player, that is such high praise for Anthony Cirelli. And Lightning fans should take that as this guy is definitely on his way, if not there, to being or to having NHL stardom. So let me know in the comments below. We're going to talk about more about expectations coming up to wrap up the show. But let me know in the comments. Is he there? Should we fully put him in the conversation of Selke Trophy candidate this upcoming season? Or do you expect to see him, maybe need more time with all that? Should we maybe not put him on the first line just right away, or should we wait? I think just throw him to the fire. I mean, he's ready. In my book, he's ready. I mean, what else does he have to show or prove to anybody that this guy is ready for first line minutes as a full-time starter on that line with Kucherov and Point? Let me know in the comments below. And coming up, we're going to talk about, like I said, expectations for next year. Surprise, surprise. Everybody kind of knows, if you've been listening this entire podcast, you kind of know what I'm going to say. So we'll talk about that to wrap things up. But we're going to talk about our last sponsor on today's episode, and that is our friends over at the GameTime app. Now, GameTime is officially an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on GameTime actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. There's so much things to love about GameTime, whether it be their flash deals, their zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, the lowest price guarantee. What is not to love about GameTime? But one of the other things that I love about their features on this app is GameTime ticket purchase. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, as well as all-in pricing. You could toggle through this feature, shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. I use GameTime all the time, whether it be for Lightning games, whether it be for, as you all know, I'm in New York, so I'm a huge Mets fan. I use it all the time, last minute. I wait till the ticket prices go all the way down. I wait outside the stadium. I buy the tickets. Bam, I get them right away, and I can walk in the door from there. So you have to use GameTime because, listen, if you're looking for affordable tickets to whether it be a sporting event, theater, comedy show, whatever, GameTime is your one-stop destination for the destination you're trying to get to. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Drop a comment below. Let us know, where do you expect Anthony Cirelli to be at the end of the 24-25 NHL season? Do you expect him to kind of just have another season like he did this year, or do you expect him to maybe regress or maybe improve upon that? Quite frankly, with me, I think he's only going to get better. His game is just very sustainable. You know, when you look at Anthony Cirelli's game, and I mean this in the most respectable way possible, and I think that if he were to hear this, he would probably agree with me to a certain extent. The reason why his game is so fun to watch, and the reason why I think his game is very sustainable, it's something that he could just do on a nightly basis. You know, trying to be Connor McDavid is a hard thing to do on a nightly basis. Trying to be Sidney Crosby or you know, any of the superstar centers is a hard thing to do on a nightly basis. Anthony Cirelli, for the most part, is a sustainable thing to be because it's just so unremarkably remarkable, if that makes sense. You know, it's not flashy. You know, there's not a complex formula, or, you know, it's really not a thing that you could go out there as an opposing player and say, we need to do A through Z to shut this guy down for the night. No, not really. I mean, really trying to stop a guy from getting into the dirty areas, from cleaning up in front, from playing physical, you can't really stop that. You know, to quote Marvel, you know, Anthony Cirelli's game, you know, maybe you could prolong it, but what he wants to do, it's basically inevitable. And I think that's the thing that really helps him out when you're evaluating his game from season to season. And when I look at his game this year, I don't think it's too outlandish to say that this guy could hit 50 points. I don't think it's too outlandish to say that this guy could get 25 goals. I think if you put him on the first line with Cooch and Point, I don't think it's too crazy to say that this guy could even get 30 goals. Now, the big thing, obviously, which for the most part, he's done well. You know, last year, this was more so of 2 years ago was more so of an issue. But obviously, in order for all of this to happen, the guy has to stay healthy. And I feel like that's going to be kind of more so the theme as well as with a lot of other guys on this team. But especially Anthony Cirelli, he needs to stay healthy. He just needs to go out there like we've spoke about in the episode with Nick Paul. He just needs to go out there and play his game. And if he goes out there and plays his game and he just tries to be himself and not someone he's not, he's going to be successful. He's going to put himself in the Selke Trophy conversation. He's going to be a very good first-line center. And the Lightning, as well as him, are in a good situation right now with Nick Paul, with Anthony Cirelli, to be able to do that, to be able to try that out. We spoke about on Nick Paul's episode how he's ready to be on the second line, possibly the first line maybe. And I said that was all dependent on what happens with AC. And I still believe that. You know, if Anthony Cirelli goes out there and has a season, not numbers, but goes out there and plays the same way he played in 23-24 this upcoming season, he will be on the first line. He will play. He will have 50 points. He will have 25 goals. And yes, a large part of that will have to do with the fact that he's playing with two of the best forwards on this team, and arguably probably top 5 forward, top 3 forward, Nikita Kucherov, and a top 10 forward maybe for some people, including myself, in Braden Point. And that's the thing that I think that the Lightning need to go into their offseason thinking about. You know, in order to make the moves, to be better, to get back to the cup, to get back to the final, you need to understand what you have. What you have is very solid personnel down, I think, the center position. Cirelli, Paul, Glendening. That third line, I'm not particularly sure as to where or who is going to be that third line center. On my armchair GM episode, I said that maybe Sean Moynihan, a guy who could really play both. He could play out on the wing, could play in the center position. Not a bad third line guy who definitely wants to win a cup. A veteran guy who I don't think is going to cost you much money either in free agency, as long as you don't go crazy for Anthony Duclair. And I think we're all in agreement too. Anthony Duclair's not coming back to Tampa, unfortunately. But yeah, I like I said, I think we're going to see a 50-point season, 25-goal season out of Anthony Cirelli. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets another top 5 nod, preferably I would prefer to see him as a finalist for the Selke next year. I want to see him as the starting center on the first line. Yeah, if Stamkos comes back, he's going to get some time on that first line. It's just the way it is, especially when things won't be working. But really, Stamkos at this point in his career is either a second or a third line winger. That's really what it is. So let me know in the comments below. And we'll be back tomorrow. We're talking about Brandon Hagel and who did I say? I said Darren Radish. So we're going to talk about on tomorrow's episodes, because we're dropping 2 tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Darren Radish and Brandon Hagel, and you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So if you're listening to us on an app-based platform, go ahead and hit that notification button. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So That's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.